Hello, and Nyob Zoo everyone. In today's video, I'll be showing you guys a very colorful dessert to make during this time of year. And this is a very well-known Thai dessert called Bua Loy. And it is basically just glutinous rice balls that are cooked in a sweetened coconut base, and it is so good and comforting during this time of year when it gets colder here in the Pacific Northwest. This dessert is typically eaten warm, so it's very comforting, and I love eating this. When I was a kid and when my mom would make this for us, so if you ever had this dish before, then it is the perfect dessert to make during this time of year. So I'll show you guys how to make it today. Hopefully you guys can give it this try and be creative with all the colors and all the squash and pumpkins and ingredients that you guys can use to make these glutinous rice balls. Other than that, let's go ahead and make this beautiful colorful dessert Bua Loy. Let's go. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is make the glutinous rice balls, but before we do that, we also have to steam and cook out the coloring agent. So for example, I am using ube today to color it purple. I'm also using a delicata squash today as well to color it yellowish orange, and then I have some fresh yam here that I cooked and steamed and pureed to make it an orange color. But yeah, for these three types of sweet potato and squash, it's the same ratio. I have about 1/4 of a cup of ube here that I pureed, and to that I'm going to be adding 1/2 a cup of glutinous rice flour, and this is the green bag version one. Go ahead and add that in there. And then we're going to add in 2 teaspoons of tapioca starch. And then I'm going to add some water. So depending on what kind of starch you guys end up using, the water varies. I'm adding about a tablespoon of hot water. And if I notice that it's a little bit too dry, I'll add a little bit more water. So the recipe for this is always depending on what starches you guys end up using and how dry it is. You'll always have to adjust the amount of moisture that you end up adding here. So I'm just going to mix this, and then as I mix this, I'll continue to add more water if I notice that it's a little bit too dry. So this is a little bit dry. I'm going to go ahead and add probably 2 more tablespoons of hot water. At this point, all you want to do is to add enough water in here so you have a nice pliable dough to work with, and for you to form it into little balls and it doesn't crack on you. Again, if you guys don't have any ube, you can always find ube in the frozen section that's already steamed. Definitely use that. And to make it even more purple, you can definitely add some ube flavoring color here to make it even darker. But this is pretty nice. I didn't have to add any in there. Okay, this one feels pretty good. So every time you're done mixing the dough, always take a small piece of this and roll it into a ball to test if it doesn't crack on you. And it looks nice. So this dough is nice and hydrated. We're gonna go ahead and wrap this with plastic wrap. Okay, go ahead and plastic wrap this just so it doesn't dry out. And we'll continue with the rest. We'll do the same thing with this one. Just put enough water to hydrate it, same amount and same ratio of flour. Okay, so the purple, orange, and yellow color are done. Now I'm going to show you guys how to do the blue, the pink, and the green. And for these, I'm not using any kind of sweet potato or starches like pumpkins or squash like that. I'm going to be using some powder. And for the blue, I'm going to be using the blue butterfly pea flour that has been grounded up here. And for the pink one, I am using the fuchsia pink dragon fruit that has been dried up and grounded into a powder here. I'm going to be using that for the color. And for the green one, I am going to be using the pandan extract here. All right, so for the blue one, I'm gonna be adding about 1/4 of a cup of hot boiling water. Mix this up really well. I used about a 1/2 teaspoon of the butterfly pea flour powder. To that, I'm going to be adding a 1/2 cup of glutinous rice flour again. Same thing, 2 teaspoons of tapioca starch. And then we're going to go ahead and mix this. So the beauty of making these glutinous rice balls is that if it's too wet, you can always add a little bit more glutinous rice flour. If it's too dry, you can always add more water in there, which is kind of nice. So this is fairly dry. I'm going to continue adding water to it until it is nice and hydrated. Same process as earlier, and then we'll continue and finish the rest of the other colors. Alright, so for the dragon fruit color one, same thing. I have about a tablespoon of the freeze-dried powder. I'm going to add in about 1/4 of a cup of water, hot boiling water. Okay, same amount of flour, 1/2 cup of glutinous rice flour, 2 teaspoons of tapioca. Mix. And if you guys don't have or want to buy the dragon fruit powder, you can definitely use beet juice as well, which makes it really nice and bright. But again, you guys can definitely use food coloring if you guys prefer, but it's also nice to use natural food coloring if you can. All right, this one is pretty good. I'm just gonna add just a little bit of water to the ends to kind of hydrate the corners here. Other than that, this one is ready as well. Nice and hydrated, and you're able to form it into a ball. Perfect. Okay, so last one is the pandan one. I have about a 1/2 teaspoon, 2 teaspoons of pandan extract, 1/4 of a cup of water, hot boiling water. Mix that up. And then same amount of flour. We're gonna add in 1/2 cup of glutinous rice flour, 2 teaspoons of starch. Mix, mix. Okay, that's good. Okay, so all our dough are nice and mixed and wrapped up so they don't dry out. Individually, I'm gonna unwrap them and roll it into little balls so you guys can see all the colors I have. Let's go and start with the green one first. So you guys can see it's a little sticky, but it's not sticking to my hand. I'm gonna put a little bit of tapioca starch on the board here. And all you're gonna do is just grab a little piece of this and continue rolling it into a ball. Just like that. Kind of like if you ever had tapioca pearls before, just a tad bit bigger. They will expand as they cook. So what I like to do is I'll have a little bit in my 2 fingers here, just a little chunk of that, and then I'll just grab and roll as I go, just to make it easier. Okay, so every time you guys finish, make sure you roll it in with some starch so they don't stick to each other. And then set them aside and we continue finishing up the rest of the colors here. Just make sure you keep this kind of covered as you go so they don't dry out. But if you guys notice, whenever you roll this, the ball should not be cracking on you. It should be a nice shine ball here. Alright, so I finally finished rolling all of these into tiny balls. Make sure you powder them so that they don't stick to each other as you go. Other than that, let's go ahead and I'll show you guys how to do the coconut syrup. And while that is simmering, we can go ahead and start cooking these as well. But look how beautiful they are, so colorful. By the way, I forgot to mention, if you guys want, you can definitely use taro root to make these as well. Other squash and pumpkins that you prefer, you can definitely use it as well. But these are the ones that I'm using today just because I have it handy. But taro will be really, really delicious in this recipe as well. The next thing we want to do now is do the coconut syrup here. So in a pot, I'm going to add in some palm sugar. I'm using about 5 of these palm sugar rounds here, or about 260 grams of sugar. If you guys want for faster melting, you guys can definitely crush this so it's faster to melt, but I got a little lazy. I'm just gonna put a hole in there and let the water do the work. If you guys don't want to use palm sugar, you can definitely use regular sugar. You might just have to reduce the amount of regular sugar you add in there because it is a lot sweeter than palm sugar. To that, I'm gonna add in a cup and a half of water. Go ahead and cover this up with the lid, turn on the heat, and put it on about medium heat to slowly melt the palm sugar, and then after that we'll add in the rest of the ingredients. Okay, so the palm sugar is nice and dissolved. Let's go ahead and add in 3 cups of coconut milk. At this point, I'm going to reduce the heat to pretty medium-low. Once you add in the coconut milk, reduce the heat to medium-low. You just want this on a low simmer to heat all the way through. You don't want it to boil, because if you do boil it, the coconut milk does tend to curl up and does separate, if you ever notice that happening. At this point, let's go ahead and drop in a pandan, 2 pandan leaves that I wrapped up really nice like this. Drop that in, and we're going to season this with some salt as well. The salt helps balance out the richness and the sweetness of this dessert. So medium-low heat, no boiling. Stir this up. While this is heating up, I'm going to let this heat up in a very low heat for a good 10 minutes or so to allow the pandan leaf to infuse into the coconut milk and the sugar. While this is infusing, let's go ahead and boil some water so we can start cooking the glutinous rice balls. Alright, so water is boiling. Let's go ahead and drop the balls into there. We're going to cook this first, and then once this is cooked, we can add it to the coconut syrup, just so that they don't get the syrup super thick. You want to cook out most of the starch first. Stir this around. So we'll bring this back to a boil, and once it starts boiling and once it starts rising to the top and floats to the top, that means we're ready. We'll drain it and then put it through some cold water. Okay, it's starting to boil and it's floating to the top. It kind of look like Skittles, color-wise. I'm gonna go ahead and turn off the heat. All right, and go ahead and strain this and then put it through some cold water. Okay, nice and strained. Alright, so back to our coconut sweetened milk here. Let's go ahead and add in the cooked glutinous balls. The coconut has been simmering on medium-low for a good 10 minutes, and I can smell the pandan coming through. I'm going to leave the pandan in there just so that they can continue infusing its flavor in there. But if you guys want, go ahead and remove it if you want to, if it's in your way. At this point, let's go ahead and add in the cooked up glutinous ball. Give this a stir. And I'm just gonna let that sit for a good 1 or 2 minutes in with the coconut milk. Other optional items you guys can definitely add in here is, you guys can definitely cut up some cooked chunks of taro in here. You can also add like coconut meat in here as well. But I grew up eating it just like this with the ball. So if you guys want this fairly thick or thicker version, you can definitely add a little bit of tapioca starch slurry in there, like a tablespoon of tapioca starch with like a tablespoon of water, and then mix it in to thicken it and adjust your thickness. But again, typically this would be eaten just like this, but as always, to thicken it, because I know some people like it thicker, you can definitely add the slurry in there to thicken it up a little bit. But I'm gonna let this come to a boil. Let that come to a boil for 1 or 2 minutes, and then this is ready to go. Alright, let's go ahead and turn off the heat. You guys can see it's floating to the top. So cute. So this dessert is typically served warm, on a hotter, warm side. But yeah, look at all this beautiful color. So nice. Since this is sticky rice, it does have that nice chewy texture, kind of like if you ever eaten mochi before. I'm gonna let this cool for a good 10 or 15 minutes before I eat it, and then that's about it. It's pretty simple. Yes, it does look like Skittles to me.